We are finally blowing the dust off of this old turd, and I'm going to spend the next 5 days going balls to the wall on this thing trying to get this done. So today is, what the hell is today? Oh, that's right. Today is Tuesday, July 4th. Happy Independence Day, by the way. I think it's probably time for another one. Anyway, today is Tuesday, July 4th. And this coming Sunday, there is a car show right in town, only a couple miles away. I've set the pretty unrealistic goal of having this thing running, driving, and being able to drive it to the show in 5 days from now. Let's tear into it. So I actually spent a few minutes on this the other day messing with it, and one of the very first things I figured out that the rear shocks aren't going to work. Now this has an AV8 rear spring in it. That spring is sold by Old Yankee Speed Company and sold through Millworks Hot Rod. If you're not familiar with them, check them out. They have a lot of really cool stuff. They actually have a bolt-in flathead V8 conversion kit for these to make a super simple swap. So it's definitely something you want to check out if you're interested in that. But anyway, back to the spring. So the AV8 rear spring is a Model A width, but it has the flatness on the ends like the Model T springs did, so it lowers the car quite a bit. Well, it lowered the car so much that the rear shocks it had on this are actually bottoming out. So these are the shocks that were on it. This is a pretty decent kit. I think Max Fabrication sells these. And these work fine on stock Model A's. This is fully extended. That is how it was sitting with the car at ride height. So those aren't going to work. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm not too worried about that. I can drive it a few miles without any rear shocks on it. Not going to be a big deal. Two things we're going to focus on right now is A, getting the alignment somewhat correct. Hopefully I can get my alignment plates on there and get that somewhat within spec. A lot better than it is now anyway. The other thing is trying to get the brakes adjusted. And I guess we probably should see if it runs too. If you're old like me, find yourself something soft to kneel on. Don't be kneeling on the concrete. Your knees will thank you. I've heard they also come in handy if you're trying to get a promotion at work. I wouldn't know, but I may have some former coworkers that could elaborate on that for you. So I just recently did a video on how to use these, so I won't really go into that. You're just going to get it set up. I'm not sure it's going to actually work on this because the car sits a lot lower. I think the wishbone's going to be in the way, but we'll adapt it and make it work. It'll be good enough for this. And I'll get a proper alignment on it at some point if this doesn't work out exactly the way I want it to. Well, this certainly isn't ideal, but I think just for the purposes of getting this thing on the road and seeing how it goes, this will be close enough for now. So I got it set up for a 16th of toe in. Now this, like I said, this wasn't an ideal setup, but I guess in the ballpark, so we're going to move on to adjusting the brakes now. One last note on the whole alignment thing, do yourself a favor, and if you have a steering stabilizer, loosen it up first. If you're not sure if you have one, check. That will save you 10 minutes of fighting with the tie rod saying, "Why won't you turn?" Don't ask me how I know. So one issue I already noticed is these little grease caps. Now, this thing is kind of a mutt. It's got 32 spindles and 35 drums on it. These are the caps that came with the 35 drums, but apparently the 32 spindle's a little bit longer. So when you tighten these up, it actually is too deep and the spindle hits this, and you can see it's kind of bulged out up here. I did find one deeper one that I think would work. I can't find one to match it. So for now, I'm just going to leave them off. They really don't need to be on there. Model A's never had them. They're really not a necessity. I can find one to match this later on. It'll be fine. So for now, we're just going to run it without them. I'm going to get the wheels back on it. And because I didn't plan very well initially, I'm going to get it off the stands and get the back end out away from the bench so I can actually get at it. Then we're going to get back up on all four stands and start adjusting the brakes. First thing I'm going to do is adjust the emergency brake. I like to have it pretty well locked up in like the third click. So we're going to yard this thing back. We'll go check the tires and see how tight they are. Well, that isn't even close. Also not even close. So I'm going to crawl underneath and do some adjustments. So I pulled the handle up to the 4th notch, and they're locked right up now. So I think we're going to adjust it a little bit. I'd like to have them a little bit tighter than that. And unfortunately, there's not much means for adjustment on these. The rod that runs from the lever right there down to the cross shaft is a fixed length, and there's really no adjustment on it. So your only means for adjustment are the rods that run from the rear brakes up to that cross shaft. So we'll get under there, tighten those up a little bit, and see if that helps a little. So this clevis right here is the only means we have to adjust on the emergency brake. First thing you want to do is break the jam nut loose. I'll pop that clip out of there. I'm going to try 2 turns on each side, and we'll see how much that tightens it up. That's a half, that's 1, that's a half, that's 2. If you're going to do this, you just want to make sure that the brakes aren't dragging after you tighten them up a little. I'm going to leave that loose for right now. We'll do the same thing on the other side. I'll give the old handle a pull there and see what happens. So the first thing you want to check is to make sure that the brakes aren't dragging with them a little bit tighter. Now I have balancing beads in these because they're not machine balanced. So that's that noise that is going around the inside of the tire. So you have to kind of go slow with it, or else you're just going to hear those and not the brakes dragging if they are. So the brakes definitely aren't touching on this side. Let's check the other side. What I didn't mention was that I backed the service brakes way off on both of the rear tires. That way, if the emergency brake does drag, you can hear it and not the regular shoes dragging. So again, that's the balancing beads, but I think they're dragging just the tiniest bit. You can kind of hear a little scuff right there, but I'm not going to worry about that. It's pretty minor. Alright, so that should be alright. Let's yard on the handle here. So that's our starting point. 1, 2, 3. Alright, I think we're pretty good there. That's fairly solid. It could be a little bit tighter, but it's certainly safe and good enough to drive. So before we actually get into adjusting the brakes, you want to take all the slack out of the brake linkage. So the first thing you want to do, you want to pull your pins. Pull forward on your brake rod and pull back on your brake clevis, just to take any of the slack out. You're not putting force on them, just make sure there's no play in there. So then you want to see how the pin goes in. If it'll slide in fairly easily with where you're at, then you're all set. Otherwise, you need to adjust that clevis back and forth so that the holes line up. So we're pretty good right there. I'm going to hit the other 3 wheels, then we can get into the actual brake adjustments. Alright, so now we're going to get into the actual adjustments. Now I won't go through every single little step of it. It's all in the service manual. If you don't have one of those, you should probably get one. So I'll just give you the gist of it. First off, you make up this little board thing. This is super handy to have. Essentially, it's just got some notches in it. This presses against the brake pedal. This then butts against the seat or the seat frame or whatever you have in there to hold it. And you've got a reference mark. So this is where your pedal should be at rest with no pressure on it. And from there, you go into all these other marks. And at each one of these, obviously the pedal is pressed down a little bit further. And your brakes should be at a certain point to where, you know, they're dragging, they're locked, they're whatever. So you just go through the process, check each one of these spots, adjust your brakes accordingly. You'll have to play with it probably when you drive it. It may pull one way or the other. You may have to do a little click here and there to offset it, but this gets you pretty damn close. I'm going to set this up against your seat frame and line up your mark here. This one's actually a little bit too long, so what I'm going to do is slide the seat back and use a shim piece of wood or whatever in between here to get this right at that line. I'm just gonna throw this piece of plate in here and hopefully that gets us close. Yeah, so we're right on the line now, so we're good to go. So these are originally designed as a rear drag system. What that means is they're designed to lock up the back tires and drag them to stop you. So they put more braking force on the rear than they do on the front, and I would assume it's so that you don't lock up the fronts and lose your steering. I don't know. But the way I usually like to do it on a stock car is that I put a little bit heavier on the front. That way you've got a little bit better balanced brakes. The fronts, like on a newer vehicle, the fronts do most of your stopping. You kind of want to do the same thing on tar roads. It's a little different when these things were designed. They were dirt roads. So I like to go a little heavier on the front. That being said, this car already has way bigger brakes on the front than the stock Model A, and the tires are a lot smaller. So if I was to go heavier on the front on this thing, it probably would lock up the front tires. So I'm actually going to do this the way that the book states, and that's go heavier on the back because this has giant tires on the back and stock brakes. So we're going to do that. Heavier on the back, a little lighter on the front. I think it'll stop all right. Usually with these things, what you have to do is adjust them, go out and drive it, see how you like it. Bring the wrench with you. You can just pull around the side of the road, parking lot or whatever, and then adjust them like that. It's really easy to do once you get the linkage and stuff all squared away. So take some fine tuning, but this procedure will get you really close. All right, we're gonna set this up on the first notch, then get the brakes so they just start to grab in the back, and then so they're slightly rubbing in the front. There's notch 1. Back those off one more. A little bit of drag, but not bad. So now we're going to kick this on to notch 2, see how the back ones feel, and start adjusting the front ones. When you're doing the adjustments, it may be easier to take the thing off the pedal, make your adjustment, and put it back on. Sometimes when these are in the tension, they don't move very easily. I'm going to tighten them up one more. Try it again. So I'm going back and forth on this a little bit. You have to try to balance the recommendations in the book with some common sense. So on the third step on that board for the pedal, it wants the rear tires completely locked up. So if I set it like that, when you take your foot completely off the pedal, it's still got a fairly heavy drag on the rear tires, and I really don't want that. So I think we're going to go a little bit lighter. The pedal might be a little bit lower. It should work just fine. We're going to move on to the front, see how those play out. Again, you got to balance it, and really you got to drive it and see how it stops. You may have to adjust, balance front and rear, depending on if it wants to lock one up on the other. So, but I think the rears are good for now. We're going to go on to the front. We've got it set up now on the second notch, and it should be starting to drag, which this one is not. So now these front ones are a little bit easier to adjust because they have the flathead Ted adjusters in them. And what that is it's just a bolt with a jam nut. So the back ones, you have to get it on the clicks when you adjust it. And one click may be too far forward, and the next click may be too far loose. So you have to just kind of balance that. These, you can put it wherever you want and everything works just fine. Well, I'm going to give it one more click on the backs. Alright, let's check it on the third notch and see how it feels. So on the third notch, the backs both have a very heavy drag. That side's a little bit heavier, but there's not much I can do about that. The fronts are kind of a moderate drag. This side seems a little tougher than this one, so I'll tighten up just a bit. It's on the third notch, so I'm going to put it all the way to the end. So there isn't really a fourth notch on that, but the end of the board would kind of be the fourth notch. So I'll put it on that just to see where it lands. So we're very heavy over here. A little less over here. I'm going to tighten this one just a little bit. Yeah, with these adjusters are so nice. You can just go the tiniest bit, makes a huge difference. You know, stuck between the notches. A little bit more on this side. That's good. Those are pretty even. Double check on the back, those should be locked right up good. Yep. Yep. So I think this is going to be a great starting point. Like I said, you have to fine tune it when you finally get out and drive it. But it's safe, it'll stop well, and it should stop fairly straight. Hopefully now we can actually get it running. So we're back down on the rollers. The brakes should be good. I rolled around underneath, took a look at everything. Double check, make sure stuff was tight, make sure stuff had the cotter pins in it. I think we're all set there. What else we got? Oh, wheels. We gotta double check the wheels. I know they're not tight, so let's do that right now. Something I had forgotten about is that I had issues with the brake light switch with this thing when it was on the road last time. You had to push the brake pedal down quite a ways before the brake lights actually came on. Now the way the switch in these things work is it's just a rod on a spring, and that rod sits against the brake pedal rod. When you step on the brake, it pulls the brake pedal rod away from the rod on the switch, which then extends, and at some point in that extension, it turns the lights on. Some of them, like this truck sitting here, as soon as that rod moves, it'll turn the lights on. This thing, it's like halfway in the travel, so I'm going to check it, see how it is. Worst case, if it's too far down the pedal, we can just unbolt the switch, put a couple of washers in there to kind of space it out, and that should fix it. So let's take a look at that. That is definitely not going to work. So that was pretty much like full force on the pedal to get the light to even come on, so that's not going to work. Let's crawl underneath there, get that unbolted, space it out a little bit, and see if we can fix that. So here's your brake light switch. All I'm going to do is undo these two mounting bolts, put a couple washers or spacers or something in here to move this further away. This middle rod here is what activates it. When you step on the brake, this goes that way, and at some point in that thing's travel, it turns the lights on. This one, obviously, it's too far in the travel. I could replace the switch, but it does work. I'm just going to space it out. Well, hopefully that'll fix it. If not, then we'll have to put a switch in it. Managed to find a couple of these little spacers here, so I'm going to get this thing mounted back up. Hopefully that'll be enough to set it away from the cross member and actually make it work right. Alright, let's give this one a shot. So I am very happy with that. That should work just fine. It comes on pretty much where the first notch on that brake adjustment board was. So that's nice and early, way before the brakes are even engaged, so that'll be perfect. That's about all we're doing for tonight. It's getting fairly late and I'm going to head to the house. So we'll get back out here first thing in the morning, start hammering away on this thing, get the fuel system wrapped up, and hopefully get this thing close to being fired up tomorrow.